What's the most horrible post-breakup story you've been part of? Story 1. I dated this one guy who was extremely emotional and super attached. We only dated maybe a month, and I couldn't take it anymore, so I had to end it. At the time, I worked in a large shopping mall, and he would meet me after work in the parking lot. Well, we were sitting in his car, and I told him I couldn't be with him anymore. Being the super emotional person he began to cry hysterically and was banging his head on the headrest in the car. He yelled that I was such a horrible person and wanted to know how I could break his heart like this. He abruptly stopped crying, looked me square in the eyes while he picked up the McDonald's food he had bought, rolled down the window and said, "If you don't want my love, you don't get to eat," then threw the bag out the window. He stared with glaring eyes the whole time. I am never at a loss for words, but this time I was truly speechless. Story 2. This girl I dated in high school for over a year was all kinds of manipulative and unstable. I finally broke up with her after she cheated on me in her room at her house, so I could leave rather than try to get her to. When I said it, without even thinking about it, she grabbed her jewelry box and chucked it at her window. The glass shattered and she started grabbing chunks of broken glass and throwing them at me. Two hit me, one in the shoulder, one grazed my face. I ran from that house and made a point to avoid her at all costs at school. After she found out that I had told people about the encounter, she went even further and came to my house in the middle of the night with a friend who threw a barbecue through my bedroom window. That resulted in police action, which I found surreal later. Story 3. I dated this woman for a couple of years. It was seriously the worst relationship of my life. She was controlling, manipulative, and took every opportunity to criticize everything I did and belittle me, especially in front of others, destroying my self-esteem to the point that I didn't think I deserved any better. She cheated on me openly on our first Valentine's Day while I was in bed sick, and still I was afraid of stepping on her toes, so I let it slide. She tore me to pieces and broke me down. All of my friends saw it and even strangers, but I was too weak and too non-confrontational to leave. I was sad every day, yet I was worried about hurting her feelings. She and her colleagues got together the weekend after Election Day to celebrate the end of a long campaign. I knew it was time to end things, and a cold, dreary November night in a city a couple of hundred miles away from my own seemed like the perfect setting. Over drinks, I quietly asked her to step outside. I told her it was over, and she lost it, telling me how lucky I was that she ever dated me in the first place. It was a one-night stand, I was drunk, she asked me out, I said yes. I was too considerate to tell her it was a drunken mistake, so yeah, real lucky. She ripped into me and tried to shame me into staying with her, and I stood there stoically, knowing this would be the last time I would ever have to listen to her try to make me feel like that, if I could just see it through. I took it all while she berated me up one side and down the other. We had been gone long enough to draw a little concern, so one of her co-workers stepped out to check on us. At this point, we were both soaking wet, shivering. I was expressionless while she stood there squeezing out the fakest sympathy tears. Seeing this, her co-worker bullies her way between us, pushes me to the side, puts her finger in my face and says, "Did he hit you again?" So that was the character sketch she had painted of me to all of her co-workers. An abusive boyfriend. Wow, I'm sure they thought she was a saint. I threw my hands up, and at that moment, a taxi drove by, radio blaring Michael Jackson's PYT as if on cue. I put on my biggest, cheesiest grin, stepped past the two of them, and began singing along. I moonwalked the length of the block, staring at them the entire time, singing at the top of my lungs until I was out of sight. I walked a mile and a half back to my car in the pouring rain, drove away, and never looked back. I don't think I wiped that smile off my face for a week, and I still love that song. Story 4. My ex has been turning up on my doorstep, begging to be let in at ridiculous hours. One night, my housemate, who didn't fully understand her level of instability, let her in because he felt sorry for her. Q sitting on the end of my bed, crying, shaking, and saying that if I made her leave, she would take the 120 paracetamol tablets she had been stockpiling. I told her I wasn't going to be blackmailed and to get out of my house. She left and I caved 30 guilt-racked minutes later and phoned her. She didn't answer her phone, so I completely panicked, phoned her mom, dad, best friend, anyone I could think of to get over there and make sure she was okay. After 15 minutes of this, she texted me saying, I threw them away. Stop freaking out. Story 5. My ex had recently moved due to getting a new job. I was still going to college, and we were trying out the long-distance thing. She was visiting for a weekend, and we decided to fool around in my room. We proceeded to S, and she went to the bathroom to clean herself up. I got a phone call. It was a guy. He knew my name and started yelling at me, demanding to know if I'd been with his new girlfriend. Turns out we were dating the same girl. I confronted her. To put this in context, we were both still unclothed, just standing in my bedroom. She started screaming and crying, accusing me of cheating. What? So I turned away from her and told her to get out of my house. She let out a roar like she was possessed, grabbed a cell phone charger, and whipped me in the back with it. Before I could turn around, she jumped on my back and wrapped it around my neck. I was just stunned. Since I'm a 5'10", 170-pound male, and she was about 5, maybe 100 pounds, I simply picked her up and calmly tossed her out of my room. After tearing the posters off the walls in the living room, she took the yogurt out of the refrigerator and threw it all over the kitchen wall. That taught me never to get involved with someone unstable again. Story 6. The worst reaction to a breakup, I was on the receiving end, happened about 7 years ago. I was deployed to Iraq, so I couldn't have a meltdown or anything. I wasn't really close with my coworkers, so I didn't talk to anyone. I could only communicate with people back home via 2 phone calls each week, which I didn't use because all of my friends were her friends. So I just plodded along for another month before I got home. She was still living in our apartment when I got there. I got off the plane, processed, and drove home. She was getting ready for work, walking out the door as I came in with my bags. We said hi and not much else. She left. I called a friend, and she happened to be going to the beach right at that moment, so I changed and came with. 2 hours after I landed, I was sitting there on a sandy beach watching 2 people swimming in the water. I thought to myself that life can't be too bad. I pushed everything bad that had happened on my tour way down deep and tried to enjoy myself. Later, after the ex moved out, I could only sleep on the couch. If I slept on the bed, all I could feel was the empty spot next to me. On the couch, I had something there at my back. The entire time the ex was getting ready to move out, I was all business. Sorting our belongings was like taking inventory at work. No emotion. I had to work again soon after I returned, so I had 10 hours a day that I didn't have to think about her. I had some major issues with PTSD, and that kind of overshadowed everything else that had happened. It wasn't until I had dealt with those things that the reality of the breakup dawned on me, and it was far too late to do anything about it. 7 years later, and I'm in worse shape than I was in Iraq. I held my tongue for the most part, never broke down, never had a chance to release all that emotion. I am incapable of being in a relationship. I don't trust anyone. I can't like or love anyone. I can't think of anything to talk about except work since that's all I do. And I don't talk about work, so I just don't talk. I would never take her back. I only wish I had had the opportunity to experience some kind of cathartic breakdown so I could move on. Instead, I have the remnants of some extinct relationship choking me anytime I want to feel something for someone again. This probably doesn't make much sense since I've been at work all day, and I'm not talking about aircraft, which is the only thing I feel confident talking about. Story 7. My girlfriend at the time had this habit of starting drama between another guy and myself so that she could get attention from both of us. She'd talk about how horrible I was to the other guy, and then she'd talk about how sorry she felt for the new guy. This happened a good couple of times, and then randomly she decides that she needs to move to Salt Lake City to be with her friends. She does and says she wants to have a long-distance relationship. I agree. She then calls me up a week later saying that long-distance relationships are too hard and that we should take a break. I find out that she's with another guy and trying to pull the same situation all over again. She comes to visit me at work and brings me a jalapeno burger from Carl's Jr. Good stuff. She keeps looking at her phone and going, "Ugh, this new guy I'm seeing thinks that I'm going to cheat on him with you. He's so jealous." I just gulp down a big bite of the burger and go, "Well, tell him he doesn't have to worry about that because I'm never going to be with you ever again. Thanks for the food." And I walk back inside, leaving her crying her eyes out. One of those cool guys don't look at explosions kind of moments. Story 8. Let's see. I tried to break up with her 3 times unsuccessfully. Each time was more and more intense. She was my first real girlfriend, so I had no standard for comparison on what dating someone should be like. I figured, having my parents as the only example, that people in a relationship argued. All the time. She was, looking back, abusive, both emotionally and physically. The third time I tried, she cried, screamed, slapped, and punched until I agreed to call off the breakup. This was during my junior year of college. She was the type of girl who saw every other woman as a threat. Some days she was convinced I was gay and was going to run off with some guy. Other days I would have loved to be as successful at flirting with women as she imagined I was. We lived a few states apart while not in school, so over summer break I let her know I was going into New York City to go to a bar with my friends. Now who knows what could happen at bars in NYC with her untrustworthy boyfriend and all the people she assumed I'd meet. So she needed to check up on me every 10 or so minutes. I lived an hour train ride from the city, mind you. Going into the night, my phone had only half its battery, so I tried to explain to her during several of my many conversations in the crowded, loud bar that I needed her to stop calling me or my phone would die, as my friends gave me grief for being so obviously controlled. So, of course, she kept calling until my phone died, putting me in a bad spot if I had gotten separated from my friends. Well, I had a good time anyway and got home safe. When I woke up around 9 a.m. the next morning, I plugged my phone in. You know how your phone would beep after being off for every new text and voicemail? Mine beeped for 5 straight minutes. I had 83 text messages from her. They were a cycle of, "Where are you? Why are you ignoring me? Hey, talk to me. Where are you? I hate you. I just want to know if you're okay. Hey, please respond. Why won't you respond?" And so on. Shortly afterward, maybe a week later, I broke up with her over the phone where she couldn't hit me. It was a half-hour conversation with her screaming, crying, etc. 1 or 2 days later, she told me she was pregnant. I panicked and didn't even think she might be lying, because despite everything, I loved this girl and thought love meant one couldn't lie like that. So she and I talked for a while. She tried to convince me to go visit her and take her to the doctor. I was kind of falling for it. She even told me that if I didn't come down and get back together with her, she'd keep the baby and not have an abortion. I called my got my life together sister, who happened to be pregnant, and cried on the phone, saying that I might have gotten this girl pregnant. She asked all the right questions, like timing of the breakup, last time we had been together, and said with 95% confidence that the girl was lying. About 3 weeks into the pregnancy, I told the ex I didn't believe her. She claimed she went to a clinic and was told she had a miscarriage or a false test, and that she had a receipt to prove it, asking me to pay her back for the trip. I said, "Are you kidding me? I can go to a clinic myself and get them to tell me I'm not pregnant. Doesn't mean I ever was." So we broke up. She harassed me for the next 6 months however she could. She even called my home and harassed my parents. My dad picked up once and told her he'd press charges after she insulted him using personal things I had shared with her. She also contacted my friends trying to get them to convince me to take her back. They were like, "No thanks." And she called me incessantly. She once admitted to cheating on me right after I left town for the summer, probably to bait me into confessing to something she assumed I'd done. When I didn't, she said she lied, then said she hadn't, then said she had. You get the idea. I blocked her number through Verizon, which offered free blocking for up to 3 months. She would then call again a few days after the block expired, so I'd have to repeat the process. She texted me from her friends' phones and tried calling me randomly, especially when drinking. I ran into her once, and we arranged a meeting in a park to exchange belongings. She refused to return my stuff until I listened to her rant for 40 minutes about how I was every name in the book. She even brought her new boyfriend to sit nearby, just in case. As we walked to the car, she started insulting me to him. When I shook his hand, she said, "Watch out, he probably wants to date you." After I got my things, I didn't say another word. I just turned to him, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "Good luck." Among my friends, we never referred to her by name, just by the nickname Thunder Curse. Story 9. I think this qualifies as unusual. I met this girl during fall semester just before I was supposed to leave for a semester abroad. I liked hanging out with her, but didn't want to start a relationship while abroad, so I was very upfront about that. We went on a few dates but never got intimate. Fast forward a year later, I was back at school, and we started talking again and hanging out. Things were going well and eventually got more serious. We were together for about 5 months when I decided to break up with her. There were many reasons. But the most important was that I just wasn't in love with her and didn't see a future together. I felt it was the right decision and ended things respectfully. She didn't take it well and cut off all communication. I had been in her shoes before, so I respected that and gave her space. A few months later, I was applying for internships and decided to Google my name. My name isn't very common, so most of the results were about me. On the second or third page of Google results, I saw a meta description that said F you. I was confused. I clicked the link and discovered a blog written by my ex-girlfriend over the course of 3 years. It was mostly angry and documented everything from when we met, to my departure abroad, my return, and then went silent during the 5 months we were together. After the breakup, it picked back up for a few posts. The blog said every hurtful thing you could imagine someone writing about an ex. The entire blog was about me. I texted her immediately and said, "Hey, I accidentally found your blog. Please remove my last name from that post." She was clearly mortified and deleted the blog. Best part? It was cached by Google, so it still showed up in search results for weeks, if not months afterward. Story 10. There was this girl in my PE class in high school who was giving my 16-year-old self some serious attention. We'll call her Heather because that was her name. I thought, cool. And that was about as far as my teenage brain took it, until I received a call a few weeks later from my best friend at the time. We'll call him Steve, because if he's reading this, he'd figure it out if I used his real name. So Steve says his neighbor thinks I'm attractive and wants to hook up. I didn't know what he was talking about until he said, "The girl who sits next to you in PE." And it started to click. Now I'm getting frantic with anticipation. Does she want to meet now? I can be over in like 5 minutes. Can I come over now? I'll come over now. But alas, he says she doesn't want to do anything yet, as she's still in a relationship. My hopes were crushed until I was told she planned to break up with him the next morning before school. Now I'm back in hopeful mode, and we make plans to meet up after she ends things at school. The next day comes and I'm awakened from my dream-filled sleep with morning energy that could hold me up like a kickstand. I get to the lunchroom, where everyone meets to eat that same ham and cheese sandwich they always have for free student breakfast. There I spot the girl sitting across from her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend, and he doesn't seem happy. I decide to lay low and stand in line next to some guy who looked like Soulja Boy's cousin to watch it unfold. She looks like she's been talking for a while, and every time she gets up to leave, he gets slightly more upset, and she sits down again. Then I hear the fateful words come out of her mouth, "I don't even care, I'm breaking up with you," which grabs the attention of the whole cafeteria. I'm not sure what went through this guy's mind at that moment, but I want to believe something just snapped, because right then, he reached up and hit her in the face. The entire place erupted. Even Soulja Cousin let out an, "Aw, man." A teacher rushed over and grabbed the guy by the arm. Heather was crying while her friends consoled her and cursed at the guy as he was dragged away. I still ended up getting together with her. Story 11. This will be the first time I've ever told this story. This breakup reaction was my reaction, and I'll be ashamed of it forever. It wasn't horrible in a threatening or violent way, but it made me seriously question myself. I was dating a woman in 2008 that I fell hard for. She was amazing, and somehow she liked me too. I've never had much confidence in myself with women, so I figured I was out of her league. That insecurity turned into intense attachment. She was further ahead in life professionally, and I think that intimidated her. After about 2 months of dating, I know, not long, I began feeling nauseous whenever I wasn't around her, and I lost my appetite for weeks. I would even get sick if I had to go a night without seeing her. I didn't understand why I reacted that way. It had never happened before. Eventually, she ended things but said she wanted to stay friends. I went along with it for a couple of weeks but was suffering major emotional withdrawal. My appetite was gone. I was surviving on one energy drink and a bag of popcorn each day. One night I went out drinking with friends, and she texted saying she might want to meet up afterward. I got overly excited and convinced myself it was definitely happening. Later, she said it wasn't going to happen. She had other plans with friends, including a guy I already suspected had feelings for her. I was devastated. In a panic, I drove to the spot we used to meet up, just down the road from her house. After a few minutes of waiting, I saw her car coming toward me. I was ready to talk to her, try to win her back, or something, but it turned out to be her little brother and her mom driving. I was a drunk mess asking them where she was and if they had talked to her. I sounded like a full-blown stalker. For the past couple of hours, she had stopped responding to texts and calls, so I knew I came off as desperate. After a few minutes, I left. I felt deeply ashamed, but still hoped I could apologize and fix things. I texted her the next morning and said, "I'm sorry about last night." She responded, "Please leave me alone." And I did. I knew how far off the deep end I had gone and that she deserved her space. Again, I've never lost control of my emotions like that before. It was the most intense case of emotional dependency I've ever experienced. I don't think I could ever admit this to someone in real life. Looking back, I'm glad it ended. The physical toll, vomiting and starvation, was destroying my body. I lost 30 pounds in less than a month and nearly ended up in the emergency room. So I guess there's a silver lining. Story 12. My girlfriend was the same way. Compulsive liar, emotionally unstable, etc. Before we broke up, she claimed she had been attacked, not once, but twice. She said someone slipped something in her drink at a party. One night, in the middle of a group of friends, she stood up, threw her keys at me and screamed, "You said her name in your sleep," referring to my ex-girlfriend. We lived in the dorms, and instead of trying to talk things through in her room, she would run into the hallway to create a scene and get all the attention she wanted. Unfortunately, she lived down the hall, so I saw her often. I broke up with her as soon as the school year ended. A few weeks later, I saw her at a funeral for one of our mutual friends. That night, she pulled me aside and told me she had a miscarriage. Note, we never had S. I followed the rules. I never got physically involved. Besides that, she was on birth control. She told several people this story, but it didn't add up when all of us compared notes. This was back in July. Fast forward to January. I'm in a healthy relationship. She hacked into my email, sent a message to herself while pretending to be my new girlfriend, and insulted my family and one of my exes, as well as a mutual friend. I assumed she was trying to turn our friend against me, but it didn't work. Pretty sure she's completely out of my life now, hopefully for good. Story 13. I was born for this thread. Short version, my ex got gender-affirming surgery. I know I'm late to the party and maybe nobody will see this, but I'm telling it anyway because it's too wild not to share. I was around 16 in high school. I had a huge crush on a guy. We'll call him Derek. I figured he was out of my league because I was introverted and he was a total social butterfly. We were in a band together. He was the lead singer and I was the keyboardist, effects person, and backup singer. Eventually, our guitarist quit and we needed a replacement. A mutual friend suggested his older brother, who was 21. His name was Tom. He was tall, skinny, had long black hair and blue eyes. Also an incredibly talented guitarist, far above our level. We began meeting regularly with Tom to play music. After a while, it became obvious he liked me. He asked me out. I didn't like him nearly as much as I liked Derek, but I wasn't used to romantic attention, so I said yes. Since I was new to dating, I didn't realize until it was too late that Tom had serious issues. His dad had left him, his best friend had passed away, and he had gone through a period of intense drug use. That was the first red flag. After 2 to 3 months, he became extremely clingy and emotionally unstable. He insisted on always being physically close to me, held my hand constantly, and told me he loved me far too often. If I didn't respond with the same intensity, he'd get upset. He freaked out if I didn't answer his calls or texts fast enough. He began writing me intense letters that, looking back, sounded like something a stalker would write. He bought me rings and got angry if I wasn't wearing them. Keep in mind, I was a naive 16-year-old. I started to feel smothered, so I tried to create space. He asked to hang out every day, and I started saying no. I'd say I was busy, then go out with friends instead. That's when I started noticing him hanging around my neighborhood. I'd be at a coffee shop and think I saw him across the street. I'd walk past the park and see someone on the swings who turned away when I looked. Sometimes I'd be home playing video games and see the same person biking past repeatedly. Tom lived 25 minutes away and didn't own a car. I confronted him. He admitted it. He said he couldn't handle being apart from me and had been riding his bike every day to follow me around. I told him to stop and said it was creepy. He didn't stop. He just got less subtle. He began standing across the street from my school at lunch, watching me. If I walked anywhere, he'd appear and follow from a distance. I could sometimes hear him crying softly. One day I had enough. I led him to a public place where others could see us and told him I was done. I didn't want him to contact me again. He completely broke down. He sobbed and screamed while I went inside a restaurant to meet friends. He walked across the street to a store, grabbed a pair of scissors and harmed himself in public, cutting his arms and hands. He made sure I could see him bleeding and crying. I called my dad to come get me. My dad picked me up and I left Tom there. After that, we had no contact except one apology call. Recently, he reached out again and apologized for his past behavior. It had been 5 years, so I agreed to meet for coffee. Side note, Derek and I got together and we're still a couple. The coffee meeting was so he could tell me that he's transitioning. He already has a higher voice, has had surgery to remove his Adam's apple, and is planning further procedures. He said he's always felt like a girl inside. This was the person I lost my virginity to. Story 14. I was living in Australia when I met a girl who happened to be from close to my hometown. We fell in love, and she ended up staying with me. After living together for a year, her visa ran out and she had to leave. Wanting to stay together, we decided that I'd go back with her since we were from the same area. We got back to England and she became distant. I helped her find a job, but she didn't want to live with me. She moved in with one of her coworkers. She didn't want to see me but still insisted on being together. Then she broke up with me over the phone. Then we got back together, but it was tough. The whole time I kept thinking, why did I ever come back? I visited her at work, and her manager gave me a weird look. I didn't like him. She was cold with me. This was the girl I gave up my life in Australia for. I even spoke to her dad. He said he didn't want anyone else to be with her, and admitted he didn't understand what was going on either. He didn't like the manager either. Fast forward a few months. Her dad passed away due to alcoholism. Despite how she had treated me since returning, I went to the funeral. Her family knew me and appreciated what I had done. Thought I was great. Fast forward another month of emotional roller coasters. I went to visit her at work and called when I was outside. That's when she told me she couldn't see me anymore and that it was final. She admitted she'd been cheating on me with her manager, the guy she was now living with. I was devastated. Fast forward 3 more months. I was still in England, trying to move on. It had been nearly a year since I came back. I had met someone new and was taking things slow. I was saving money to move back to Australia. I was too proud to ask my parents for help. My mistake, my responsibility. I'd been receiving texts and Facebook messages from my ex the entire time, which I ignored. One night she called me, which was weird. I didn't answer and just texted her, WTF? She responded saying she was on the roof of my building. I thought, whatever, and ignored it. Then I heard her yelling, I know you can hear me. I know you're in there. At that point, I called the police. I told them, there's a girl on my roof. I don't know what she's on, but she seems drunk or high and might be a danger to herself. I considered going out to talk to her but decided against it. While I was still on the phone, I heard a loud bang at the front door. I looked out the window and there, sticking out of the ground, was a knife. I couldn't believe it. She had run off. I gave a full report to the police, and they were as stunned as I was. I told them I was literally about to go out and talk to her. She texted me again the next day like nothing had happened. I have other stories about her, but she was completely unwell. I have no idea what I ever saw in her. Story 15. Oh, I've got one. When I broke up with my high school boyfriend of 2 years, a stage 5 clinger, as you'll see, he threw a full-on temper tantrum. He yelled, cried, and screamed for hours. Eventually, when it started getting dark and cold, he paused long enough for me to say I should get home. He asked if he could walk me back one last time. I was naive, very naive. I said yes, thinking it was just a 15-minute walk, and I felt bad for him. Not even a minute into the walk, he asked to borrow my phone. He used it to call his mom and explained everything that had just happened, pausing in the middle of his explanation to fall on the ground sobbing. As if the stares from strangers weren't embarrassing enough, he then handed me the phone and said, "My mom wants to talk to you." His mother confirmed the story and then asked me why I was breaking up with her son. I gave my explanation as calmly as possible, though I just wanted to hang up and run away. But it got worse. He was still lying on the sidewalk crying, refusing to move, and then his mom began pleading with me to take him back. In the end, what should have been a short walk home turned into a 45-minute nightmare. Why I didn't just run, I'll never know. Story 16. I broke up with a guy after he completely lost it over me attending a classic rock concert with my cousins while he was at work. I had told him about it, and he seemed fine. But once the concert started, he did everything he could to ruin it by blowing up my phone. After the show, I stopped by his apartment to talk and try to clear things up. Instead of talking, he tried to avoid me like a child. Long story short, he ended up using my own shirt to strangle me that night. That was the moment I decided the relationship was over for good. I started seeing someone new, and that's when the messages from my ex started. Things like, "I can see your bathroom light from the street. You should turn it off." Thing is, I wasn't even home. I was at my new partner's place. The highlight? He called me at 1:30 in the morning, demanding to return a few items I had left behind. It was stuff I had no intention of keeping. He showed up at 2 a.m., driving his mother's car, wearing a trench coat to drop off, a plastic container, a hair clip, and a photo. Story 17. Around 6 or 7 p.m. on a Friday night, I broke up with my girlfriend. She cried and we said our goodbyes, going our separate ways. Thankfully, I had paid attention to her stories about how she treated her exes. So I jumped into my truck and called 5 of my friends on the way home, telling them, "Get to my house now, no time to explain." By 8 p.m., they were all there. I explained, "I just broke up with my girlfriend. She's big on revenge. She'll probably come by to toilet paper the house or worse. We need to be ready." For the next hour, we brainstormed. Then we left to gather supplies. Fast forward to 2 or 3 a.m., we were across the street in our ghillie suits. Yes, we're into airsoft. Hiding and waiting. Sure enough, we heard their laughter down the street. My team, Team Alpha, moved silently through the trees, got past them, and headed for their car. One guy got underneath it, while the rest of us wrapped it in plastic wrap as fast as we could. Meanwhile, Team Echo kept track of the girls using Bluetooth. As the girls got to my house and started laying out toilet paper, Team Echo ran at them yelling, scaring the life out of them. Team Alpha deflated 2 tires before retreating to hiding. Eventually, we all made it back to my house. Team Echo even snagged the girls' toilet paper. Because hey, why waste it? We debated watching the aftermath, but decided on a Battlefield 3 night instead. Looking back, maybe it was a bit much, but I sure caught up with my friends that night. Story 18. Worst, but best thing that ever happened to me. I was 12 and I was going out with a girl I barely knew. We had just started dating, and the very next day she dumped me. The reason? Completely trivial. Just because she wanted to. We were 12. Anyway, as an angry kid, I was really upset that someone finally liked me and then dumped me the next day. I punched a big metal container outside that stored outdoor equipment. It was midwinter in eastern Canada, and I ended up splitting my forearm almost in half and pushing a knuckle halfway down my hand in one punch. After hitting the wall, I slouched down behind the container. Then the bell rang, and everyone started running past me to get inside. I was alone outside, bleeding, broken, heartbroken, and crying in the cold. Then she found me. Not the girl who dumped me, but another girl, someone I had always seen as a kind, quiet type. She walked over and asked if I was okay. Nobody else noticed me, but she did. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. She sat beside me and waited until I could speak. I told her what happened. She brought me into the classroom in the middle of a lecture, grabbed my bag, and took me to the office where my father picked me up and took me to the hospital. She stayed with me at the hospital, and afterward, we spent a lot of time together just talking. Eventually, we started talking about video games, movies, and all the things we had in common, which turned out to be everything. We became best friends. Once I had healed and returned to school, she even tried helping me find a girlfriend. It didn't go well. Every other girl I liked was uninterested or not a good match. She'd tell me what they said about me, try to guide me, and somewhere along the way, we fell in love. I was just turning 13, but somehow I knew she was the one for me. We started dating and have been together ever since. She has always been my best friend first and my partner second. We spend nearly every moment together, and every one of those moments is special. We're both 20 now and have lived together for over a year. I'm going to marry her once I graduate. Falling in love with my best friend is the best thing that ever happened to me. And it all started with a completely ridiculous incident involving someone else who didn't matter. Story 19. I'm around 25 and had been seeing this girl for about 4 years. She was a bit complicated, but so are most of us. We had been living together, but I had moved out. One day she came over to my cousin's house, where I was staying, and chatted with my uncle. I walked out and saw her sitting in her car, clearly upset. I wasn't in the mood to deal with it, so I walked to my truck to leave. She chased me down, and when I got in the truck, she glared at me and punched the headlight. I drove off, but she followed me. We ended up on a 4-lane highway. She pulled up next to me, swerving and driving recklessly. Then she slowed down and I got a bad feeling. Suddenly, she pulled ahead of me in the fast lane and jerked the wheel sharply to the left, cutting across the median. I pulled over and ran across the road. Much to my horror, I saw that she had crashed into an elderly couple's pickup truck. Her car's front bumper had struck their windshield. I turned and looked at her car. All the wheels were blown out and the roof was crushed. She was lying across both front seats with a severe head injury. It was traumatic. I asked the police where she was being taken and went to the hospital. I couldn't see her that night due to restrictions and left in shock. A week later, I returned and saw her father. That's when I found out he had told the hospital staff not to let me in. Eventually, I was allowed to see her. Afterward, her father joined me in the elevator and told me what a failure I was. That's when I lost it. I told him I should have held him accountable years ago for allowing what had happened to his daughter. I later found out she had been using drugs the night before the crash and that her father had helped her pass a drug test by using someone else's sample. He also told her to blame me for everything. I was arrested and blamed for the incident. I went in front of a grand jury which found no cause. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. Story 20. It was high school and we had been dating for about 3 months. I tried taking her to a public place to end things so she couldn't cause a scene, but I made the mistake of driving her there. She sensed what was coming and refused to get out of the car. We talked through it. She cried, begged, and denied it was happening. I had been on both ends of breakups before and thought I could handle it, but it became clear that it wasn't going anywhere. I drove her back to her house and tried again, rationally, calmly, to explain that it was over. She continued to argue, plead, and resist. After 30 minutes in the car, I lost my patience and began yelling, demanding she get out. She locked the door, refastened her seatbelt, and stayed put. After another 10 minutes of shouting, she finally gave in and left. I thought it was over. A few days later, after some gossip had gone around, I opened my locker and found a marble notebook inside. I had never shared my locker combination. I opened it to find what was basically a diary, but every entry was written directly to me. There was a note asking me to read it all so I would understand. It started off sounding normal, but became increasingly erratic. Toward the end, it appeared as if she was trying to fake acceptance and closure. There were other things too, like her sneaking into my neighborhood at night and leaving a couple of smashed potatoes on my car with faces drawn on them. There was a note that said, "You're next." That about sums it up. Story 21. I'm a lesbian. My ex and I were on the same cycle. Our periods were synced. One day she asked me to be intimate with her during that time, and I told her I wasn't comfortable with it. Later, while I was passed out drunk, she took advantage of me, initiating something I hadn't consented to. I woke up the next morning with the aftermath all over my body and face. I broke up with her immediately. The next month, my basement suite door was defaced, with blood marks and a squished tampon pressed against it. Every month after that, she did something similar. Sometimes it was red-painted messages or drawings. One month she wrote something about us being destined to be together because we would always be in sync, using her used products. This continued for almost a year until she was transferred to another city for work. A few months passed and it was my birthday. I received a gift package in the mail and assumed it was from my new girlfriend. There was a short note saying something about us always being connected. Inside the jewelry box was a used item that confirmed it was from my ex. Now every month I receive a letter in the mail with a used item sealed in a plastic bag. Story 22. In my sophomore year of high school, I started dating a girl. Fast forward 2 months and I could tell things were going south. One night after watching a movie and while we were waiting for our rides, I decided to break it off. I didn't know what else to do, so I walked about a block away to wait. Turns out she threw her iPod and phone into a nearby river. A little after the breakup, she asked if we could talk. Being too much of a pushover to say no, I agreed. After a short walk, she stopped me and showed me her arm. There were 14 cuts on it, one for every day we were together, as it was February 14th. I was only 15 and had no idea what to do, so I kept it a secret. A few days later, people at school were telling me to check on her, saying something was wrong. When I finally got a hold of her, I discovered she had cut my name into her arm. That was one of the most terrifying things I'd ever experienced. Later that day, or maybe the next, I can't quite remember, she posted a MySpace bulletin saying she had overdosed on something. I tried to call her, but she wouldn't answer. I ended up calling 911, gave them her address and what information I had. When paramedics arrived, they had to pump her stomach just to be safe and insert an IV. When they pulled up her sleeves, they saw everything and ended up referring her for a 2-week stay in a mental health facility. At the time, it was the scariest experience of my life. As a kid, I had always thought about what it would be like to call 911, but when I actually had to, I hated every second of it. Things are better now. I don't talk to her anymore, but I've heard she's doing well. And whenever people talk about their crazy ex, I have this trump card. Story 23. I have two. First, I have a couple of serious medical conditions, and I met a girl who went to a different high school while we were both at a doctor's office. Not knowing anything about her illness, I started dating her. Later, I found out she had an extremely severe form of lupus. I didn't care. I was there for her unconditionally. I spent many nights in the hospital with her, to the point where I got expelled due to my attendance record. Her school was about 50 miles away from where I lived. Things got worse, and she began to decline rapidly. I was with her every day and night while she was bedridden. We were literally cuddled up on what would become her deathbed. And then she broke up with me, said she didn't think I could handle her dying. She didn't want me to see her that way, and she blocked me from visiting her. For anyone wondering, ICU nurses are very serious when they say you're not on the visitors list. She passed away a month later. I still take flowers to her grave on her birthday and the anniversary of her passing. Her mother still loves me like family. It took over 2 years for me to climb out of the depression. Girls I've dated since have even criticized me for continuing to bring flowers to her grave. Second, I got engaged while I was in college. And as you can imagine, being engaged means you accumulate a lot of stuff together. It hurt even more when she broke it off because she had been cheating on me. To make things worse, her mother, who had always acted like a mother figure to me, refused to let us live together. She made me give her $200 so she could go home for the summer. I didn't know until later that her mother had despised me the whole time and never approved of the engagement. She still talks negatively about me to this day. Only 2 months ago, I finally purged all our shared belongings from my apartment. Story 24. Bipolar exes seem to be a theme here. So here's my story. I dated a girl last year who, at first, seemed like just a quirky art major. Turns out she was far more unstable than I could have imagined. About a week into dating, she called me crying, saying she had just been fired from her job and that her friend was bringing her to my apartment. I had been teaching my younger brother some Muay Thai at my place when she called, so when she arrived, I hugged her and told her to lie down while I drove my brother home. About 45 minutes later, I returned to find she had taken everything I owned off the shelves and started organizing it. I have a pretty large collection of books, movies, and games, but nothing was in any kind of order. Then she pointed to several pieces of multicolored construction paper scattered on the floor by the bed. She told me she had drawn me a picture. She handed me a piece of paper with a large scribbled circle on it and several torn holes from pressing the pen too hard. That's when her mom called. The speakerphone was on, so I could hear everything. Her mother told her she wasn't well and needed to come home and take her medication. She replied, "I'm okay, Mom. I'm in love." At that point, I was caught between concern and disbelief. I gently suggested her mom might be right and that I should take her home. She lashed out, screaming, "I love you. I'm not leaving." Then she shoved me and started yelling for me to hit her. I tried to calm her down while holding her hands, but she began clawing at my face. I pushed her hands away, performed a controlled takedown, and sat on her to stop her from hurting herself. Or me. I called her mother and asked her to come pick her up. To this day, my friends still make jokes by saying, "I drew you a picture." Story 25. I broke up with a guy I had been dating for 2 years when I was 17. I always knew he was bad news, but I was in a really bad place at the time and couldn't see things clearly. I went to his house to finally break up with him, but he refused to accept it. He went absolutely ballistic. I left his house and got into my car. He followed me out and began slamming his head into his mailbox, screaming unintelligibly. I started the car and began to drive away. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing on his lawn with a pair of scissors, slashing at his neck. No, he wasn't really trying to harm himself. How do I know? Because I got convinced back into the relationship a few weeks later and ended up marrying him a year later. Like I said, I was in a really bad place, and somehow it made sense at the time. I finally woke up and divorced him when I was 21. I'm 28 now, and I've never been better. As crazy as everything was, I wouldn't change a thing. I'm just thankful I made it out alive. Story 26. I was young and naive, only 14, when I started dating someone who was 17. She was emotionally abusive and extremely controlling. She even failed high school on purpose because she couldn't be without me. A little over a year into the relationship, I couldn't take it anymore and broke up with her. She spent the next 2 months trying to win me back, then dropped out of school. Years later, I messaged her to tell her how deeply her actions had affected my life. She replied saying I must be misremembering everything and denied all the abuse. A few more years passed. She got married, and I was in a serious relationship of my own. Then she messaged me again to talk about how unhappy she was with her husband and asked if I would go on a date with her for old time's sake. I said no, blocked her everywhere, and changed the majority of my usernames. Story 27. This story didn't happen to me. It happened to a good friend of mine in college. He worked with a woman who had a dangerous ex-boyfriend. She was terrified of him, so my friend offered to stay with her for a while to keep her safe. Nothing romantic, just one friend helping another. They kept a journal of all the scary things the ex did and reported him to the police regularly. He once snuck into her house while she was at work and hid in a closet overnight. One morning, my friend noticed that the trunk of her car was slightly open. He remembered it was closed the night before, and he suspected the ex was hiding in it. He called the cops, who knew them both by name at this point, and 2 officers came by just as their shift was ending. They tried opening the trunk, but the guy was holding on to the slats to keep it shut. Finally, one of the officers said, "Forget this," went back to the patrol car, grabbed a can of tear gas, pried the trunk open, threw it in, and slammed it shut. Story 28. A few years ago, I was dating a woman, and things just weren't going well. One evening, while dropping her off, I told her it was over. She began hyperventilating and refused to get out of my car. I got out and walked to the passenger side to comfort her and make sure she made it inside. She jumped over to the driver's seat. I went to the driver's side. She jumped back. This game of cat and mouse went on for a few minutes. She finally got out of the car and laid down under it, right between the front and rear tires. After coaxing her out, she punched me in the face a few times before I left. The next day, her sister called asking if I knew where she was. I found out later that she had a complete breakdown in the street after I left. The police were called. While they were talking to neighbors, she kicked out the rear window of the cop car, escaped while in cuffs, and ran off. They found her hiding under a porch a few blocks away. For context, I met her while she was beating up a telephone booth. In hindsight, I should have taken the hint. Story 29. I had been dating this girl for a few weeks in college. Nothing was really clicking, so I decided to end it. She immediately started crying, telling me we had something special, that she loved me, and begging to stay together. She then suggested we have since we hadn't yet, as a way to fix things. I had to fight her off and explain that it wasn't a good idea at all. Now I'm trying to calm her down, and it's taking a while. Just as things seem to be settling, I start hearing my name being yelled in the hallways. "Where is Tubbsy? Who is Tubbsy? Tubbsy!" I wasn't sure what was going on and didn't want to leave her while she was in such a fragile state, so I stayed. Eventually, my name stopped being called. She went to the bathroom, and I quickly hopped on her computer. When she came back, she saw me on it and said, "Well, I guess if we're not dating anymore, can you take yourself off my top 8? I was stunned. I agreed, we said our goodbyes, and I left. Later, I found my friends. I told them I'd broken up with her and what had happened. My friend Rory swung by and asked where I had been. He had organized a scavenger hunt in the dorm, and I was one of the items. We all burst out laughing. Story 30. Not as crazy as some stories here, but for me it was awful. I met this girl at work, and we just clicked. She was smart and very funny. However, I wasn't looking for a relationship because I had been with my significant other for years. We went out for coffee, and the topic of relationships came up. Red flag number one. I told her I was seeing someone and that I'd love to be her friend. She agreed, and everything seemed fine. Over the next week, we started hanging out, and all seemed okay, until she told me she was pregnant from a one-night stand. I had made it clear I just wanted to be friends, so I tried to be as supportive as I could. During the second week of our new friendship, she told me she was in love with me, wanted to be with me, and wanted to start a family. I stopped dead in my tracks and told her that was never going to happen and that my girlfriend wasn't comfortable with our friendship. Rightly so I would have to end it. This is where the crazy began. My phone blew up with abusive messages and phone calls. I ignored them, and they became more and more violent. She started spreading rumors at work. She told my boss that we had been intimate on the job and that I used drugs at work. She threatened to harm her pregnancy if I didn't go back to her. This went on for weeks. I ended up quitting my job, I got a better one, and getting a restraining order. 3 months later, the messages started again. But this time, she began contacting my family members on Facebook and harassing them. The calls returned, now filled with desperation rather than anger. I ignored everything, and eventually it stopped. Last week, I got another angry message from her. Apparently, someone filed a complaint to her boss saying she had taken clients home, we both work in disability care, and used drugs. She assumes it was me and is now trying to sue me for slander. Story 31. It may be an overreaction, but when my wife of 3.5 years suddenly told me she was moving back to Arizona with our infant daughter, without any intention of reconciliation, I loaded my Mossberg and stepped out of our apartment. I believe I intended to end myself, but not indoors. Obviously, I didn't go through with it. Just 3 hours earlier, we had been a seemingly happy family of 3. My daughter played in the living room, I was enjoying my hobbies, and my wife sat on the couch gaming and texting. I would soon learn who she was talking to. She got up to use the restroom and her phone went off. My peripheral vision caught part of the message. Not until June. When were you planning on coming here? She had mentioned a wedding in June that she said I couldn't attend. I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to read her messages. What I found were 3 weeks of texts between her and someone named Dan. They talked about the kind of relationship they wanted, how they'd go on dates while leaving our daughter with his mother, how I was boring and unappealing. Ever since our daughter was born, intimacy had vanished, but apparently not for him. She had planned to attend the wedding and just never return. She would send for her belongings later, taking the only car, our daughter, and leaving all financial responsibilities with me. I confronted her when she got out of the shower. She was instantly hostile, accusing me of invading her privacy. But compared to what she was planning, I didn't feel guilty. That moment, she confirmed her plan. She was leaving. I felt crushed. I no longer saw a reason to live. But as I turned on my phone to call my parents and say goodbye, it froze. Just her photo staring back at me. My daughter. That image stopped me. Suic is never the answer. There's always more to live for, even when it seems impossible to imagine. If you're going through a breakup or divorce, it will hurt, but you will recover, you will live, and you will thrive. Story 32. The first guy I was ever intimate with became incredibly possessive afterward. I was 17 and he was 19. He had graduated early, had a full-time job, and his own place. He was responsible, charming, and dangerously jealous. One day he showed up at my school, not during lunch where it would have been easier to find me, but by going through the front office and using his work connections to locate which class I was in. He met me outside the classroom and walked me to my next class, glaring at any guy who looked my way. I was beyond embarrassed. It was my last class of the day, and I just wanted to go home and call him to talk things through. But that didn't happen. He was outside waiting for me, with flowers, chocolates, and new clothes. He immediately tried to carry my backpack and guitar, which I refused. I snapped and told him he was acting insecure and needed to give me space. He broke down in tears and walked away. I gave the gifts to my friends and drove home. Oddly, my mother came out to greet me, something she never did. She asked why my boyfriend had called her crying. Apparently, he had phoned her immediately after we spoke. sobbing and rambling about how he was just protecting me from all the dangerous men. I called him and said I needed space to think. He seemed sincere and said he would respect that. 4 hours later, he was pounding on my front door, demanding to talk. My dad nearly called the police, but I intervened. I stepped outside and there he was, with Reese's Pieces and the movie Ever After. 2 days later, I brought my brother with me to officially end the relationship. Years later, we reconnected as friends. He seemed to have changed, but his life was a mess. He had 3 kids with 3 different women, one of whom lied about the paternity, and he married the one who cheated on him. He now has 7 kids in total and only sees the youngest, who lives with the mother. I truly believe I dodged a bullet. Now, jealous and insecure men are a hard pass for me. I barely dated again until I was well into my 20s. Story 33. I always hear guys say, don't get involved with someone unstable. But after you hear my stories, you're going to say, don't let someone unstable get involved with you. Crazy ex number 1. I dated this guy named Nick for about 1.5 years, sometime between being 22 to 23. At first, everything was great. He was a nice guy who worked at the Apple store. I wasn't that attracted to him physically, but he was so sweet and we could talk about anything. However, he started getting really clingy, possessive, jealous, and I highly suspected he would lie about random things. One time I went to a coffee shop to meet one of my guy friends that I hadn't seen in a long time. Nick called me and I told him who I was with. He got furious, accused me of cheating, and called me every name in the book. He had major trust issues and told me one of his former stepdads was abusive. His mom was also pretty out there. She once told me she used to prank call a coworker pretending to be a client just to make jokes about her weight. This was a woman in her 40s doing this. So anyway, Nick quits his job at Apple because of some story about not liking a new manager. He becomes unemployed, and after his apartment lease ends, he moves back in with his mom and stepdad. This goes on for 6 months, and it gets old really fast. It's hard to date someone who's jobless and living with their parents. We were having issues, and he was becoming more unstable. I told him I needed space, and he smothered me more. We were on the same phone plan at the time, and he would check my call log and call anyone I'd spoken to. Friends were telling me, hey, your boyfriend called me today. What's going on? At that time, I was working at a restaurant and had plans to go out with some friends one night after work. He knew this, but showed up at my job with flowers, wanting to talk. My coworker who was about to leave with me, he's gay, not that it matters, was waiting outside. Nick started begging me to stay and talk, crying and clinging to me. My coworker had to pull him off me, and we drove away. The next day, Nick came to my house. We were in my room, and I told him it was over. He suddenly started having what looked like a seizure, or he was really good at faking it. My dad had to come over, and eventually Nick snapped out of it, calmed down, and left. I started seeing a guy named Zach shortly after, and I got a call from a woman saying she was having his baby, they were engaged, and I was a homewrecker. She claimed her mom worked for a phone company and got my number. It sounded convincing at first, but after a few questions, it became clear it was a prank. Turns out it was Nick's mom calling me. Later, I found out she had also called my job and accused me of using substances in the bathroom to try and get me fired. Also, while Nick was working at the Apple store, he'd offer people cheap, refurbished computers. My aunt, roommate, and a friend each bought one. Turns out he had been stealing computers from work and selling them. He eventually got fired after his roommate, who also worked at Apple, returned from a trip and found that Nick had wiped his computer, apparently planning to sell it. They matched serial numbers and confirmed the missing devices. Story 34. I once dated someone who, after I broke up with her, completely lost it. She went into my closet and took all my work pants, unzipped the zippers halfway, and then tore them the rest of the way down. She took my favorite pair of sunglasses, scratched the words, "You jerk," into them, and then threw them behind my dresser. I found them 2 weeks later and got angry all over again. She broke into my truck at work, took my address book, and called every woman listed to ask if I was romantically involved with them. Some of them were my relatives. She worked at a collections agency, so she had tools to access personal info. She used that to harass female friends of mine, and even got her coworkers involved to mess with them at their jobs. When I found out, I told her to stop and demanded she pay for the damages. She agreed. But when she came to my apartment to settle things, She bit my arm so hard that it bled down to the bone. I had to call the police. She told them I was the one who attacked her. But since there were no marks on her and I had a clear injury, they arrested her.